Hello and welcome to another episode of the Reverse Mentor Lab,
where we engage with thinkers from around the world to explore how leaders of today can learn from leaders of tomorrow.
You're back with your hosts. I'm Joshua.
And I'm Jens. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Reverse Mentor Lab podcast. Today, we're going to talk about, does everyone need a mentor? Welcome back to the show. Hey, Joshua, how are you doing? Great to be back with you in another podcast.
Yeah, we're slowly making our way into this podcast scene, Jens. And for those who don't know, in the podcast world, there's a number of podcast hosts refer to it as the podcast graveyard, because a lot of podcasts don't make it past 10 episodes. And, you know, because we've been recording so many, Jens, I don't know if you've noticed, but I was reflecting on it the other day that we've actually gone past our 10th episode, which is an exciting milestone to think about in this journey that we're embarking on.
Yes, I think we released episode, is it 15 or 16 today officially? I mean, recording, we're already in the 20s, 1920. Yeah, agree. It's good. Cranking out podcast and gaining 2 followers per year.
Yeah, per year. And you know, it reminds me, that joke that you just made just reminds me of a saying from Naval Ravikant, where he says that a mistake is that you write to be read. And I think that, you know, we've learned so much more than just from the following and the number of interactions that we have. We've learned a huge amount by engaging in this. We've learned about new tools, but we've also sharpened our thinking from the way that we communicate ideas and the value that we add to different discussions.
Yeah. I agree. First and foremost, we do this for us, and second, for everyone who is listening and watching. And that's maybe going back to one of the other episodes, which was around like working on yourself. If you do this kind of things and it's helping you to develop, it's one of the awesome things to put time into.
Yeah, and maybe just double clicking on that quickly before we dive into today's topic is around that very notion of it. I think that, you know, now that we've got this digital age, I think when you think about doing work on yourself and how you go about doing that, is what is the harm in publishing it? What is the harm in having a blog and putting it out into that space? Because like I've said, not in this podcast, but in a different discussion with a friend, is around doing the work, and someone may find value in that work.
Yeah.
And you're first and foremost doing it for yourself. But if you put it out on the internet and it helps someone achieve something else or something that they've been struggling with, that for me is extremely powerful. And it might not happen immediately, but in the longer term, the hope is that we'll help someone with a problem or solve a challenge that they're facing.
Yeah. And on top of that, being part of the journey, I mean, if you just look into a couple of, if we just take famous people or sports people or whatever, imagine you could go back 20 years and see how they started. If you just take Joe Rogan, who is one of the most famous podcasts or most successful podcasters, look back into when he started. Well, you can see still, I have never done it. Maybe I should, like episode 1 of the Joe Rogan show. Like, holy crap. I even don't want to imagine. He will be on a different planet right now than he was. So it's also the possibility for people to be part of your journey, whatever you do, if you document that. So I think that's an interesting part of doing something like we do with the podcast as well. I mean, if you just look into my personal podcast, the Jens Heitland show, just recorded episode 94. If you look into the first 10, it's also on a different level, but it's part of the journey. And there are people who have been following me since episode number 1, and you're one of them. I hope, at least.
Yeah, you do. We won't get into that because maybe I only followed you in January, but who knows? And so that's the example that you used there about, you know, referencing people and seeing their journey and going along for their journey, sort of a great segue to kick into today's discussion and the topic that we've got lined up. So in the intro, you already introduced it, but maybe just for those who didn't maybe hear it, is the topic that we'll be taking a deep dive on today is, does everyone need a mentor? So Jens, does everyone need a mentor?
Yes. So that was the podcast for today. No, I truly believe that everyone needs a mentor, but on top of that, everyone can be a mentor in the same way. So that's something I would love to explore. So for me, let's take a step back and look into what is mentorship. mentorship is, for me, if you just take the basic concept of it, is two people, at least two people, interacting with each other and sharing knowledge, sharing experiences. That's the most basic version. Though that I have to say, sometimes it's only one person, because you can be your own mentor in interesting ways. So, for example, if you journal every day, you can be your own mentor, and looking back 5 years or 2 weeks or one day, you can be your own mentor because you learn from yourself. But let's more look into the mentorship in general. For me, it's so important, and I truly believe that everyone should have a mentor in different life stages. There might be different people, but I think it's super important to have a mentor relationship all the time. What about you?
Yeah, so I sort of love where you took that. And obviously, we do have a few notes that we use to trigger our thoughts and things like that. But just two things quickly to expand on before I share my views is, the first is around you yourself can be your own mentor. I think it's extremely important to think about, and it sort of maybe provide a lot of people with a bit of a pause for thought in terms of what's happened in the last 18 months as we've dealt with this global pandemic. How have you yourself helped yourself navigate this space? And, if you think about that in a more confined perspective, how potentially have you yourself also helped your family navigate this space, whether it's just being more aware of mental health or things like that. And the other element is around sort of, what does that mean going forward? So you used an example, Jens, of, journaling, making time to reflect, knowledge transfer, all of those types of things. How is that created inside of that space, and what does that mean for a mentor relationship going forward? And, now to answer this from my side is, does everyone need a mentor? I think that I would agree with you, is the answer is yes. It's more now just around saying, what does it mean when you enter into a mentor relationship? And you already spoke about some things which I would again agree with around knowledge transfer, sharing guidance, opinions that are being dissected, deconstructions, etc. But I would almost take that in terms of a mentor relationship develops into, I would say, one of friendship. Because I think that if you look at a mentor like, Bill Campbell, who's also regarded as a coach, which is another rabbit hole we may go down, but he developed a close friendship with the people that he mentored inside Silicon Valley. And that then develops into something completely different, and it's no longer just transactional. And that's something that I sort of have found with the mentors that I've been exposed to, is that it's more developed into a friendship where that often integrates different ways of thinking, but also exposes you to different ways of doing things. Because I think so often, and we've touched on it in different scenarios, but people are really important. And Jens and I share both for a love of people, is how does that evolve in terms of being a mentor? And what does that mean in terms of the mentee who's being mentored, but also the mentor, and that gets into sort of bi-directional relationships and things like that.
Yeah, a lot of things to unpack. Just going a little bit deeper into that, for me, still high level. There's maybe, if we just take mentor relationships, there might be formal ones which are like more the corporate style. Hey, we have an official mentor agreement and a mentor relationship, and they're like super informal one where it's like, hey, we just like each other and we are hanging out with each other and learning from each other. So that's just the starting point. But for me, from a mentor perspective, so there's a mentor and the mentee, though that it's bi-directional, like we always say. It's like you learn mutually. But in the end, it's really that the one with the other person is kind of challenging, but also enabling at the same time. So it's really with the true passion and the true willingness of supporting the other person, but not just supporting whatever the person is saying, supporting in a way of helping the person to understand, helping the person to discover what is behind their things, giving guidance and enabling them to think differently. Now, I've had that with my mentors, and still have that, where it's always a conversation about a problem, about a topic, about whatever is going on in my life. And then you just discuss that topics, and then you get opinions or you get questions which help you to think differently. And that can be as easy that the other person is saying, yeah, but how did you get to that conclusion that you should be doing this? And then I know, because of the relationship, they don't want to offend me. They're just saying, hey, how did you get to that? And then while me explaining that, I'm then having, like, thinking it through again. It's like, yeah, either I have no idea or that's the reason why. And then they dig deeper with me. And that's where the coaching aspect comes in. Like you mentioned, is a mentor is kind of not a coach, but it is kind of a coaching element in that if you do it well, because it's about asking questions that are not guiding, but asking a question that enables the other person to unleash where they come from, what they think about, and going really deep into that. What do you think?
Yeah, and so, maybe I think one of the biggest lessons that I had from a close mentor and who's developed into a very good friend of mine was when he took me aside, and I was working for him at the time inside of a brand and marketing team, and he actually made me do my own performance analysis. And, a lot of people might hear that and say, how can you do your own performance analysis? And it was simply by asking questions and getting me to fill out the evaluation before I went and met with him to evaluate how I'd performed. And, the first time I can remember it quite clearly, I was sitting there and I was like, geez, this feels strange. I've got a manager who was also a mentor of mine asking me to do this. How do I critically evaluate what I've done? And the reason he did that was because he wanted me to think about what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And he was and that's where the coaching element comes in, is in teaching me to think about what I was doing, he was actually gravitating and gearing my performance up rather than just telling me what I did wrong and what I did right. He was first going to offer, yes, sure, he did offer his opinions on that, but he actually got me to think about how I was doing things and why I was doing those things. And I think that that's just a small thing that you can think about if you're a manager in terms of engaging with young thinkers. Is how could you become a mentor with them by just asking different questions? Yeah. Or potentially flipping, a performance appraisal on its head by giving the young thinker the performance appraisal ahead of the time and saying, hey, Josh, just go and do this before we meet and let me know what you think. And I can clearly remember some of the other questions that he used to ask me around, why did I think in that way? And so much like you were saying, is the questions that you're being asked, which then helped you to unlock a different level of thinking, but also taught you something for other later stages of your journey through your career. So I might take lessons from my mentor and implement them when I'm mentoring someone else. Or if I'm engaging with an experienced thinker as a reverse mentor, which is another concept that we may unpack or may not. But how do you go about doing that in a sensible way? How are you more conscious of potential questions that you may ask because I've been mentored by someone who's older and more experienced than I was?
Yeah. That's for me an important point. It's about the different perspectives you gain through that as well. So I mentioned it in one of the other episodes that one of my mentors helped me to understand the systematic way of that organization and where I could do my next steps in the next 5 years in that organization. And it was, for me, it was more about the perspective of, hey, there's not just one way. Hey, there's not just one possibility to go about. There are different ways of how you can be successful if you just look into the corporate world. But it's also, if we take like what you mentioned, the reverse mentorship, where a young person is supporting an experienced person on understanding the world from a different perspective, just through the engagement. Let's do again extremes. A 60-year-old person and a 20-year-old person. They are thinking completely different. They experience the world where they're living in completely different. They're in different parts of their life stages, and they can learn so much from each other just by engaging. And I think these different perspectives have helped me as well in mentorship relationships. Doesn't matter if I was mentored or if I was the mentor. Always to see things differently and learn on a daily basis. Like every interaction helped me to see things differently and evolve as a person. And I think that's one of the most powerful things why everyone should have a mentor, because just these different perspectives help you in whatever you're doing, and not necessarily only the business topics.
Yeah, and so this sort of builds into the next point, and you raised it a bit earlier around the different types of mentors. So you could have a mentor that's an informal mentor, and let's group them in that setting. And you can have a formal mentor where it's really just transactional, and that's sort of maybe dictated by your organizational structure, as an example. And one of the things when I think about mentorship is that, and I mentioned it earlier, is around how does that develop into more of a relationship than just one that is transactional? And I think when I think about mentorship and coaching, is that sort of how I sort of start to think about a difference between the two, is where mentorship can develop maybe a closer link towards friendship in terms of developing out that relationship, whereas coaching may be just more of a relationship that's driven by transactions. So you're helping them to achieve certain things or moving them in a certain direction. And whereas mentorship, then, you're putting the development of a longer friendship or a longer relationship inside of that space, because you're more vested in terms of what that means for the development of that person that you're helping through or asking those questions of, in terms of the overall space that you're creating with inside of that relationship.
Yeah, it's always hard to go into details on, hey, what is a mentor and what is the coach. I have slightly different opinions, but it doesn't really matter. It's more about building that out over time is the important part. And then I agree, is this friendship piece is just the result of a good relationship. It's like I have mentors where we got good friends, and I have mentors who tremendously helped me my whole life, who are not good friends. So we still have a good relationship, but it's on a different level than with others. That's just how it is. And I think that's important for people to understand, that not each mentor relationship is like a lifetime relationship. Maybe you have a mentor for a certain period in your life, and that can be 4 weeks. That can be half a year. That can be whatever the time frame is. It can be lifelong, but you don't have to. So it's also, again, going back to the other topics we talk about, it's doing things with intention and then exploring as long as it's bringing value. And it's not something bad to say, hey, I don't need your help anymore in that topics, or the kind of the relationship is not working or bringing anything, because in the end, everyone needs to get something value out of the relationship. So it don't necessarily need to be a lifelong thing. So it's also taking out the pressure of starting this for people who are interested in exploring that, is, hey, let's have a chat and figure things out. And it's, if you go more into the official way of mentoring, then you can say, hey, I would love to spend more time with you because I like your way of thinking. You really help me to think different. And off you go. And then it's maybe after 4 weeks, yeah, thank you, it don't work. Just being open and honest with these topics. That's the possibility you have in a mentorship relationship.
Yeah, lots of good points there. So maybe if we take that a step further and we say, how can you go about seeking out a mentor? How do you find a mentor? If you use this example of, having a relationship that can last for 3 weeks, or it's just you engaging with someone around a specific intention, how and where would you suggest people start in that thinking?
It's fairly easy. I start always with the perspective of, this is an interesting person, and I want to learn more about that person. That's for me the starting point. And that's really the most important part of a mentorship relationship. So if the other person is not interesting for me, if I'm seeking out for a mentor, then I'm not going to listen to that person. That also means that this person needs to have similar values and ways of thinking like I have. I mean, ways of thinking more in a value perspective, that I'm related to the feelings and to the person. If that's there, then it's going to kind of at least be interesting. If I look back, I've as well had mentor relationships where I reached out to people because I've seen that they do something extremely well in a specific thing. Like they have been in a different part of the business, and I've seen that they're extremely good in something. And I wanted to learn that. So I literally just approached them by saying, hey, I would love to learn this from you. Would you spend a couple of hours with me explaining that? And then that's maybe more transactional, which was, hey, they are explaining me. And then through that, it was built out a relationship, but not in the way where I approach someone with, hey, I admire that person. I would really want to understand where you come from. It was more about, I want to learn this specific thing and I want to engage with that person. And sometimes it went into a longer relationship. Sometimes it was just the interaction, which was a couple of weeks. But how do you see that? How do you do this as a young thinker?
So an interesting question, Jens. And I think when young thinkers potentially think about mentorship, is that they may think of it in the sense that you're going to engage with someone to be taught something. So an experienced thinker is going to teach you how to do something. And the example that you used springs to mind is where you reached out to a specific person to learn something inside of that space. And I think sometimes as young thinkers, they would think that the mentor is going to find them. And what I mean by that is if you're inside of an organization, you're going to get told that this manager is going to be your mentor. But how can you potentially flip that on its head and, like Jens mentioned, reach out to someone who you value, whether it's their thinking or whether they are an expert or highly skilled in the area that you want to learn about. And inside of this information age, you've got the tools and the access quite literally at your fingertips to do that. And the biggest barrier is yourself. Yeah. In that you are not going to go and reach out to a person that could become your mentor.
That's fitting so perfectly to the other conversation we had in the other episode, which is like doing the hard thing and working on yourself. It's like this is the one thing that's, if you have a large organization, I just need to plug that in. Sorry for interrupting, because there are, in large organizations, there are official mentor systems most of the time, because that's what the HR team needs to set up. They have heard or read a book about that. 99%, these are not the successful mentorship things. The real successful mentorship things is if you take action and ask someone, hey, I would like to learn from you. Hey, I would like to engage with you. And there's no importance of, hey, you're the old person, I'm the young person. It doesn't matter. I want to learn from you. I want to understand your ways of thinking. That can be a senior person in an organization asking a 20-year-old person, or the other way around. Doesn't matter. But it's this interaction where starting point is I'm taking action and I want to engage with the other person. So it's not about waiting until someone says, hey, this is the right person to talk to. It's like finding it out on your own. That will make you successful, and find different mentors for different parts in your life. Sorry.
No, it's all good, and we've been doing this for a little while now, so we're building off each other and things like that. And what I'll bring it back to is around discovery and connection. So it's first and foremost asking yourself, how can I go and learn from someone else? And is this person potentially going to become a mentor of mine? Could I be a mentor to them as well? So that's maybe the discovery element. The other element is then around connection. So how can you go and build out a mentorship relationship or mentorship connection? So what are the steps that you need to take as an individual once you've identified or discovered that? But then on the converse, and the other side of that is, how can an experienced thinker potentially make themselves more open to that connection? And that can quite simply be about making yourself available for 10 minutes a day to have coffee with a young thinker, or putting out some of your learnings as an experienced thinker that may help young thinkers answer questions that they are having in their own career path that they are dealing with right now. And I think that if you think about those two things, first of all, discovery, how are you going to go and seek out a mentor? Where do you go about your thinking inside of that space? And from a connection standpoint is, yes, the experienced thinker can also open themselves up. But on the other side, young thinkers, how are you making yourself more connectable? And what does that mean in terms of, again, building out that mentorship relationship? And Jens and I will have to agree to disagree here, because otherwise this podcast episode might go on for 4 hours if we have to debate the differences between mentors and coaches and friendships and relationships and all of those things. But where I really come back to is around, how does that develop out longer term? And by longer term, I don't necessarily mean that you always have to be in touch, but your network and your community grows with the more people that you contact.
Yeah.
And a mentorship relationship may literally be 7 days or 2 hours. And you may learn as much in those 2 hours as you'll learn from another person over 10 years, but it's a different type of learning.
Yeah.
And I think that for me is where that mentorship, it's almost like the ecosystem expands, the more mentor and mentee relationships that can be built and created inside of it.
Yeah. And I want to go back to that, making it a habit. I just have seen it over and over again. I was in the situation that I was seeing the top management of one of the largest organizations in the world quite often. So if they come out of a board meeting, so it's like the top dogs of a 150,000 employee company coming out of the board meeting, they're hanging out with each other. The supervisory board members, which are some of the family members of that company who founded the company, they're hanging out with each other. Imagine they would consciously decide, hey, when we have a break, I want to interact with the youngest person I can find on the way to the coffee machine or whatever. So if you're an experienced thinker, just think about that. Do this consciously, build a habit of interacting with the youngest person in the room, always. Even if it's just a, hey, who are you? What are you doing? If you just build that into your habits on a day-to-day base, and you don't need to be on a board level to do that. You can do that wherever you are in an organization. You don't even need to be in a management position. You can do this right now. Interact with the youngest person. As soon as you see a young person in your environment, interact with them. Ask them what they're about, what their day is, whatever it is. Even if it's just one small interaction, even if you just say hello, that's already the first step. And the same for the young thinker. Look who is the most senior person in the room and try to interact with them in the same way. I have seen it. I've tried things like that. It's not normal in an organization that this is going to happen, but I think that it's super powerful if you unleash this. Imagine just the example of that company where the board members would, instead of hanging out with each other, which they do every day, because that's their safe space, every one of them would seek out who is the youngest person I can find right now and interact with that person for 2 minutes on a coffee break. It will change the whole company.
It will, and sort of just being conscious of time here and in true innovator style, Jens has brought it around in action and encouraged people to think about how do you make that action a habit and what does that mean in terms of how that could potentially change the culture, but also unlock a significantly valuable resource inside of a company by helping the youngest members inside of that company unlock their thinking and accentuate their talent and their growth by learning from others. And so I'll answer this and build off what Jens said from a young thinker's perspective. So Jens, you spoke about an experienced thinkers and encouraging them to go and interact with younger generations inside of an organization. Now, when young thinkers enter inside a big organization, and if we say 1,500 people, you may feel very lost and you might feel like a goldfish in a big ocean. And how do you start about doing this? And my suggestion is, as a young thinker, first and foremost, start with your immediate peer group. So who are you walking into that organization with? How are you interacting with them? Because if you interact and you're more comfortable interacting with those around you inside of your immediate peer group, you're then going to find it easier to go and interact with those outside of your immediate peer group, maybe a level up inside of an organization or in a different department. And the other element is around, don't be so super siloed in terms of just staying inside of your department. If you look, and I've referenced this in a previous conversation around the way Steve Jobs designed the Apple building in California, he designed it for serendipitous interactions. Mm-hmm. And by going and interacting and asking questions of different people in different departments, first and foremost, you'll grow your own thinking and you'll grow your knowledge, secondly, around what is actually happening inside the organization. So when you have the opportunity to meet an executive that's not in your department, you'll actually have some common ground that you can talk to and refer to, rather than just going in as another young thinker that's joined the organization. And I think if you think about combining those two things from an action perspective, you can then really start to answer the question of, does everyone need a mentor, and how do you go about creating those mentor relationships?
It's a great finish. I think these are really actions I can highly recommend everyone trying it out. I mean, you don't need to stick to it if you don't like it, but it's really just something you can try out for a week. Just make it, or try to make a habit out of it, and then figure it out on the ways, like we always do with prototypes. Awesome, yeah. Joshua. Was a pleasure having you, having discussions with you again on this topic. I think that's still something we need to explore more, because these generational learnings are more and more important as more digital the world gets. Because one part is the wealth of knowledge of experienced thinkers, and the other part is the understanding and seeing the different perspective of that world where we are living in right now from the young thinkers, and where they will be brought in. I truly believe that's a huge opportunity. It was great talking again.
Lots to unpack, Jens. Thanks as always for your time, and we'll see you in a virtual setting again soon.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks for listening and joining us on the journey that is the Reverse Mentor Lab. If anything fascinated you in the discussion that we had today, you're welcome to set up a 15-minute coffee chat with us. Our emails are in the show notes, and you can also connect with us on our website, thexyzplayground.com.